a little bit more.
Stephen, can I stand right there? Thank you.
No, listen. I said, here comes the Pope. One has decided not to retire. Wait, hey, yeah, let's do this. Let's do this. The Three Musketeers, and he was D'Artagnan.
You ready? One, two, three.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Fine, good to see you.
Okay, me too, me too.
One more?
All right. I wish I had a wig. I wish I had.
This gentleman has short, uncolored hair. I don't think I've ever seen it like that before.
Are you taping this?
Oh, no, I'm not. I wish I was there. I got right here.
Oh, God, that's so cool. I hope the rest of the all tape will go like this.
It's all uphill from here.
The last time we were together, we tried to take Thomas out.
Delighted that you're all here tonight. I am Sarah Lentini, President of the Arts and Cultural Council for Greater Rochester, and it's my very great pleasure to welcome all of you here to the council on this wonderful February evening. My gosh, what a powerhouse of a group of folks we have here tonight. Each one of these gentlemen is so incredibly talented, has had an impact that goes around the globe, quite literally. I don't think there's a one of them that hasn't had international impact. And ask you really what is a three-part question, all trying to get at maybe some of your early life. I'm wondering what drew you to the arts, what obstacles you faced, if any, and what support you got, if any.
Thank you. Those are Clyde's gods speaking to tell me. Anyway, I was drawn to the arts by very shallow teenage reasons. Ivor Baxter Dance Company in Jamaica was a big hit, national company. Wore the best clothes you saw on anybody, drove the best sports cars, and we're always having lunch. And they were just so glamorous. I said, damn, I want a part of this. and not Martha, but Ivy was my gymnastic coach in high school, and she thought I could dance, and somebody broke his leg. And I took over, and everybody said I was fabulous. I didn't know what I was doing. I was just listening to my partner and doing the best I could. And the next thing you know, I got invited to the company. And my parents had always stressed the arts, always dragged me to lunch or concerts where I had to sit still and behave, and I was a bad kid. Now that I'm a great grandfather, I know this. When I was a kid, I was an angel. It was my parents that were, messed up. So, anyway, but they had really involved me in the arts growing up, so I can't blame them. After that, it was horrendously difficult to get to where I am. So you young ones, not you, Clyde. been out there with me, slugging, you know. But anyway, it was just difficult. Lots of concerts without pay. 2,000 people in a 6-passenger station wagon, 20 in the room, you know, just horrible situation, which I will not allow my dancers to do now. My executive director, is right here.
Clyde, how about you? Tell us, if you would, about your early experience and how you got involved in the arts and where the support was with them.
Is my mic on?
And mine was either.
Can Garth hear me? I'm going to jump into the middle and then I'll go back to the beginning. Because I spent years traveling around Africa and South America, and then I came back to the States with a family, and I needed a job. And I didn't want to take my family to New York City. I didn't want to go to UCLA. I didn't want to go to Ohio State, because, you know, you arrive in America and nobody in the family speaks English. So, you know, you have to have, you know, I wasn't going to take a step down in my career. And I get this call, I get this notice, and Irma Pilashenko was one of them. And they let me know that my ex-professor from Ghana, Professor Alberto Poco, who was a friend of yours and a friend of yours, he had retired, and they needed someone to fulfill this position. And they were going back and forth between African American studies and the dance department, and the Greeks and the Trojans. Because the Africans we only wanted an African man who does African dance. And the modern dance people were saying, we only want someone who knows Broadway, who knows it. So you can imagine what that was like, right? And so they called me in, and we sat down at a big table. And at that table, I satisfied both the Greeks and the Trojans. I said, you name it, I can do it. And after the interview, I walk out into the hall, and here's Garth Fagan. And so, I come to New York, upstate New York, and my wife was thinking that it was New York City. I said, no, I'm in New York City. This place is up in the boondocks. And I've been there before, because when I was traveling with the Lamone Company, we used to travel this route like the old vaudeville route, going through here and up to Toronto and Detroit and out to the Midwest. And I said, no, this is a nice place. It's a nice place. And so Garth sees me in the hall after this interview with Irma, and he says, well, and he must have known about me before, but he says, well, I see that they've chosen the right person to be here. And I said, what'd you say? He said, I think you are a very good choice. And so I said, well, if you know, I've heard a lot about you, and if what I've heard is true, then maybe this is true. Is that Sriram Bakshi back there? So Sriram was the director of the theater department. I mean, I have a whole bunch of friends surrounding me who reinforced what Garth said. And then Ina Farley, she's a Jamaican woman, and Raoul Farley, God bless his soul. They said, you know, this is a place where genius can flower. And I said, all right, let's give it a try. I've been here now for 26 years. Hallelujah. Be careful of what you wish for.
He satisfies the Greek, the Romans, and the Jamaicans.
Okay, my gosh. Sean, how about you? Tell us a little bit about what drew you to the arts and what helped you along.
Okay.
It is. Every one of you is a hard act.
It's amazing. It's not even so much it's a hard act. It's a humbling act. Because I stand on your shoulders. And I thank you for that. So my beginning is pretty cool. I mean, I'm this little black, nappy-headed boy from Auburn, New York, growing up in what they considered to be the projects in Auburn, which was Malone Village. And I realized when I moved to New York City and started to live on 153rd and Melrose, it wasn't a project. We only thought it was a project. When I got to the South Bronx, I was introduced to projects. But what is really profound is listening to Clyde and listening to Garth. Because I have had a really wonderful connection to all three of these gentlemen, where when I met them, it was like, it was simply perfect. There was no need for proselytizing, there was no need for grandstanding. Immediately, it was like a home exhale in which I felt immediately embraced, but more importantly, protected somehow. And I think that it's intrinsic because when you ask me why did I become a dancer, why did I become a singer, why did I become a performer, why did I become what now I consider to be a giver, was because I wanted to eat. And not in a joking way, but in a profound way. Because, you know, cake in my house was something that happened once a month, once every 2 months, you know, kind of thing. It was always part of Sunday dinner after you had come home from church, something of this nature. And I had been singing in church since I could remember. There was a wonderful woman by the name of Cordelia Carter. And she ended up as my music teacher. Because my parents would take me to church, and I went to the church that Harriet Tubman built in Auburn, New York. Yeah, a church that at one point was pastored by Thomas's mother. Okay, Mother Warfield. Okay, yeah. The connections and the circles are profound indeed. And so at this church, being 2 or 3 years old, I would go and take 3 voice lessons from Mrs. Carter a week. Because every Sunday, I sang a solo in church until I was 13 years old. And so I got a profound sense of Negro spiritual music and the songs of the Zion Gospel. And I did not realize the profound and prophetic education I was getting at that point. Because years later, when I found myself in South Africa and in the Caribbean, I heard these motifs in their original form. And to hear them sing in South Africa, you see where the Zion, the African Methodist Zion Church comes from. And it is quite prolific. Paul Simon captured that in his album. Okay? So, here I am, and I'm singing every week in the whole 9 yards, and my Aunt Jane, when I was about 7 or 8 years old, there was an audition by the Merry-Go-Round Playhouse, now a very established and famous playhouse. It was called the Auburn Civic Theater at that point, and in the summer it was the Merry-Go-Round Playhouse, and they did Broadway quality plays. So there was an audition for a show called Shenandoah. And there's one black person in Shenandoah, and he's a little boy, and he's a slave. So my aunt says to my dad, I'm going to take Sean to this audition because he can sing. But afterwards is where my life changed. Because after that, there was a cast party, a green room celebration, opening night. And when I got there, everyone's duded up and dressed very nicely in the whole 9 yards, and my mom had gave me my Sunday clothes, so I was looking good. And I walk over, and there was a big, giant table of goodies. And I froze in my steps. Like, everything stopped. And I stared at that table for about 20 minutes, it felt like. And this guy, named Eddie Sales, who was the associate producer at the time, walked over to me and said, you know, Sean, you can have anything on that table you want. And I was like, really? And he was like, yes. So I stood there, and I stood there for another 5-10 minutes just looking at that table. And I walked over, and I kind of tested it out. I picked up a little cookie. I took a bite, looked around, so I was going to get in trouble. Nobody said nothing. I took another cookie, and I took a bite. Nobody came home. Then I opened up a napkin and said, this is for my mother. And I folded up this food and put it in my pocket. I sure did. When I got back to my house that night, around 12:30 at night, my mom was sitting up waiting for me. She asked me how it was, and I said, Mom, it was really cool, and da-da-da. Because do not miss the story. My mother and my father were not at my opening night. Because we almost that was not part of the culture yet. We did not get that. So my parents were not at my opening night. And so So I said, my mom was sitting there for me. She said, Sean, how was it? I said, it was really great. And she said, did you like it? I said, yeah. And I said, I think I want to do this. And she's like, really? Do you love singing? I said, no, that's fine. But Mom, I can eat as much food as I want. And I said, the only thing I got to do is sing and dance, and I can get us food, that's what I'm going to do. You know? Right? So you know what you are. So I started to be able to see this, and it was great because it was said when I finally got to New York, I recognized that I could come back if needed and do something in Northern New York, still be global, still be important, still have a voice and a footprint in the international world of dance, because you did. And so I stand firmly on the shoulders of Garth Fagan, firmly on the shoulders of Clyde Morgan, and met Thomas Warfield in college. He was my senior, he was my mentor in college. I was a freshman and he was a senior, and he kept me out of so much trouble.
Thomas, oh my gosh, maybe we don't even need to ask what drew you to the arts.
Okay, first things first. Well, I grew up here in Rochester. I come from a family of two prongs, arts and service. You know, my mother is a person who did anything for anyone at any time. As a young kid, first grade, there was a play called The Little Black Note. Well, I was first grade, I was at Harley School. I was the only black student. So obviously we played Little Black Note. Now all the other kids were running off, especially my brother, running off doing all kinds of stuff. But I sat through every rehearsal. And I sat right next to Mrs. Rosenberg. She was the producer. And that's where I learned. And even today, that's the stuff I do right from that moment. And why I feel this educating each other is so important. Because the stuff we don't know is the stuff we don't know about ourselves. Yeah. And that's really, the world needs that from you. So, anyhow, later on I went off to college, although I wasn't a very good college student at first. I didn't like college, I wanted to be in New York, that was my thing to do. So I went to New York. Went to New York to be in Joffrey Ballet. And I got injured, hip injury, maybe the third month I was there, could not dance ever again, that's what the doctor said. And I thought, well, okay, I'll sing it. I know opera, so I went over to New York City Opera. And I got the chorus of New York City Opera. And one day somebody said, well, you know, they're looking for extra chorus people for this new Zeffirelli La Boheme at the Met. Why don't you go over? So I did that. And I got into this La Boheme, and I got to be kind of buddy with Franco Zeffirelli, who at the time I really didn't know who he was. But he said something to me about education. And he said, oh, it's not just about getting that degree for yourself. It's about honing in on your craft. Oh, you've got talent. That's not the point. The point is, do you know your craft? And I thought, what is he talking about? I've been doing this for... But it sunk in, and eventually I did go back to school, went to Purchase. And it was from Purchase, almost everything, the rest of my life unfolded. All this work I've done internationally really came initially from Purchase. When I was in graduate school, actually going to graduate school at the University of Utah was because of Purchase. And at the University of Utah is where I created this organization called Peace Art. And the idea really was bringing those two throngs that I grew up with, service and art, into one thing. And I had a group of friends, and we would find money and travel around the world, and we would create these peace concerts, different places. And eventually I came back to Rochester, and I'm at RIT. But it doesn't really matter to me whether I'm singing or dancing or teaching. they're really all one thing to me. They're all just about this idea of expressing myself. But it's not just about expressing myself. It's about expressing myself so that it gives you permission to express yourself. And that's the gift I get every time I see Garth Fagan dance. That's the gift I get every time I see Sam Cohen. Actually, every time I see Clyde. And it's the work I've done together with Sean at the Institute. And it's really the work of all our lives. The thing is, you've got to be what you were born to be, just so that I can also be what I'm born to be. Okay, I just have one thing that Louise told me to do. Let me just introduce my mother. Just
Great.
And his mother brought him to see my company when he was a wee baby.
my daughter was just accepted to NYU, and she has won the Martin Luther King NYU Scholar Award, $100,000.